So the whole who killed WCW thing.
Again.
They're trying to like hint at throwing everybody under the bus. They already hinted at Eric Bischoff was the problem, that Vince Russo was the problem,
Right.
the WCW executives were the problem.
Everybody has a different opinion on who to blame.
Yeah. Everybody has a different opinion about who to blame.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can blame Eric Bischoff. If WCW didn't have Eric Bischoff, it wouldn't have went big in the first place.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to say this.
Okay.
I don't think you can blame Hulk Hogan. Yeah, I mean, there were certainly some things he did that didn't help WCW. Listen, how many of y'all were actually watching WCW prior to Hulk Hogan's entry into WCW? None of you? I was.
Yeah.
It was like a backwater swamp of wrestling. Okay, RoboCop saved Sting. Abdullah the Butcher got electrocuted in the Thunderdome or cage or whatever it was. I don't know. There was just a lot of bad stuff in early WCW. Oz.
Yeah.
It talked about Oz.
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought it was weird that they hammered on that like quickly. Like that was one of the first things they talked about.
See, the thing is, it wasn't really that big of a thing in WCW. It happened just very briefly. Mm-hmm. But I guess it was an example of how bad WCW was back then. Ric Flair, they lost Ric Flair. Mm-hmm. So what do you do?
Yeah.
I mean, like you lose the greatest wrestler of all time. He goes to the WWF, wins the title twice.
Yeah.
Then he comes back. So it was just bad stuff. Did Eric Bischoff make mistakes? Certainly he did. Losing Steve Austin, his treatment of Flair. I mean, there was a lot of things that were just bad. It's bad when the WWE treated Ric Flair better than WCW. Ric Flair, who's not primarily a WWE talent, was treated better by Vince McMahon in both of his careers in the WWE. Mm-hmm. He was treated better than his home territory. I mean, come on. Can you blame Vince Russo for a big part of it? Yes.
Yeah.
There was one idea that Vince Russo had that was actually good in WCW. Everybody gets an angle. The problem is he gave everybody bad angles.
Okay.
Like the time that Scott Hall threw television title in the trash and then Hacksaw Jim Duggan, who's a janitor at the time, takes the title out of the trash and becomes the television champion.
That's pretty bad.
But at least with Vince Russo, everybody had an angle or a storyline that was going on. Everybody was doing something. They had something creative for everybody. Can you say that for the WWE right now? Can you say that for AEW right now?
No.
It was Vince Russo. Vince Russo came in there. When the Attitude Era first came out, WCW had an edgier product. And then Attitude came out, and then suddenly we're like giving birth to hands. And WCW just could not compete with this.
Yeah.
Because of their standards. And then when they did go raunchy, they went overboard with it where it was ridiculous. And they got Vince Russo. And I remember watching. They thought Vince Russo was going to save it.
Right.
Okay. So before Vince Russo shows up, it's already on a downward slope. Mm-hmm. The problem with it was they couldn't compete with the edgier WWE product. They couldn't get their stars over. What they did to Goldberg was terrible. Okay. I know a lot of people want to bash on Goldberg, and if Bret Hart was here, he'd have a lot to say. At that time, Goldberg, at least in South Georgia among fans, was just as big as Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Yes, he was.
Okay. And you're going to have him lose the title to Kevin Nash. Kevin Nash deserves some blame in this. You're going to have him lose the title to Kevin Nash. Although I will defend Kevin Nash on this. He was over at the time because he was the leader of the Wolfpack.
Right.
But you're going to have him lose to Kevin Nash at Starrcade, and then you're going to do the finger poke of doom in January of 99. That's not good. That's not good booking. That's not good television. That's not good anything.
Right.
Okay. The other thing is, in wrestling, cheap shots, especially when you're the losing person, very rarely work. Like the whole, that's going to put butts in seats comment from Tony Schiavone about Mick Foley, that he was told to say.
Right.
So, don't do that. Learn from history. That's why Tony Khan needs to stop. And then you had the difference between Vince McMahon, who is a wrestling promoter, versus television executives who are television executives that know nothing about the wrestling business. They had a hand in killing WCW. So I blame several people. I blame the WCW executives. I blame the corporation at large.
Right.
The structure of the corporation. I blame Vince Russo. I don't blame Kevin Nash. Although I think him beating Goldberg wasn't a good idea in hindsight. Now, I don't know who was behind the finger poke of doom. If that was Kevin Nash, that certainly hurt. If we could go back in time and rebook the situation, him beating Goldberg and ending the streak could have been made into a good storyline. Okay, between the Wolfpack and Goldberg. Leave Hogan out of this. And it would have been good. It would have been good. But yeah, apparently they gave some details on Hogan's contract. 4 pay-per-views a year.
Yeah.
And yes or no. That doesn't work for me, brother.
Right. Yep. If you want to look at individual booking decisions, then you really need to look at what they covered in the first episode, which was Starrcade 97 and the convoluted finish.
Yeah.
The way they presented it on the show was like that was the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way they presented that. And as far as who to blame, I don't think you can blame one person or one entity. It was like the perfect storm of bullshit.
Yeah.
They were on a roll. They had the terrible Starrcade 97 finish. And then you had the whole AOL Time Warner debacle. What they made clear in the episode is that they didn't like wrestling and they didn't want WCW. And they made the decisions that they were going to basically go PG while the competition has mostly naked women on it.
Yeah.
And guys cutting off people's penises with a samurai sword.
Probably not the best examples of the Attitude Era. You also had Stone Cold Steve Austin with a beer truck hosing down his boss.
And they covered that. You know, they talked about if you look at the ratings throughout 97, you see that gap starting to close. And then at the very end of 97 at Starrcade, they have that terrible finish. I can't remember how they presented it, but I've heard Kevin Nash talk about this on Steve Austin's podcast. I believe it was after WrestleMania 13 or 14 maybe, when I think Sullivan told Kevin Nash that they're headed for an iceberg or something like that.
Yeah.
After that WrestleMania, like he said something like the water's getting cold, Nash.
Yeah. A lot of things that you can blame in the WCW at the time. Mm-hmm. I think you're exactly right. You can't point the finger at one person.
The title of the show was asking, who can you blame? And I don't think you can blame one person. You can't blame Bischoff. It's not all his fault. It's not all AOL Time Warner's fault. It's not all Vince McMahon's fault. It's not all Hogan's fault. But, you know, giving Hogan creative freedom, I mean, I don't think that helped at all.
Not in the long term.
No.
Probably initially, to keep them.
They needed help. 94, 95, whenever they brought him in, he was probably able to help them with some booking decisions, I imagine, right?
Yeah.
Right? Because he has the experience. He knows how this is supposed to work. But if you got an ego in the way, I mean, you're going to go into business for yourself probably.
Well, Hogan had the right mindset about things. Hogan brought in a lot of people that he'd like to work with. Here's the thing. You can't blame the guy. Okay. He picked guys that he thought were good people for him to work with, help him, get over, and also were safe workers.
Right.
Like, our fat video, the number one slight that we made was against Earthquake.
Right.
He was one of those guys. Earthquake was a guy that Hogan could fight, that looked menacing and huge. He was a safe worker. I mean, and of course, if you're the top guy, you don't want to get injured.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just common sense.
Right.
You don't want to go against somebody that's going to injure you.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're gonna have your favorite people to work with, and you're gonna want to work with those people. I mean, some of the things that Hogan did made sense long term.
Yeah.
Especially when you eventually have to start growing new talent.
Right.
It doesn't make sense.
Right.
I'm surprised Hogan jobbed at Goldberg.
So you had Hogan coming in, you had Nash coming in, you had Scott Hall coming in. They made some good decisions together. I believe it was Scott Hall's decision for Sting to do the Crow thing.
It wasn't his decision; it was his idea.
Idea. Hogan turning heel. The NWO. I mean, there were some brilliant things happen, but maybe we'll get some more answers in the second episode. I don't know.